So as we were sitting there, he said, if I could fly in formation underneath certain aircraft, that I'd never have to worry about money again. Whew. This is going to be a good one. Hey, what's up guys? It's Ryan. Welcome to my channel. On this channel, we talk about all things aviation. So I've had the opportunity to be an F-15E pilot, and I flew that thing in combat, and then I was an F-16 Thunderbird stunt pilot, and now I'm doing commercial aviation where I've flown Boeing aircraft and I've flown Airbus aircraft. So on this channel, we just talk about all the awesomeness that is aviation. And this story is going to be really good because I'm going to tell you about a real life offer to become Barry Seal and do what he did in American Made. It's freaking crazy. I'm going to tell it in first person because it's just better to tell stories like that. But this story was actually sent to me by a fellow fighter pilot. He sent me the story on Instagram, and if you want to send me stories, like aviation related stories and awesome videos that I can break down, go ahead and do that. My Instagram is just @bjetclean, so fire that off and I'll get to it eventually. Thanks so much for being here. Please, before we get going, dominate that like button for me. That would just help me out a ton and I would greatly appreciate it. So in a little bit, I'm gonna release a reaction to American Made, but I wanted to tell this story. And this story is kind of included in that video, but I'm gonna get more into depth in this one, and it's gonna be strictly focused on that interaction and that potential experience of what happened that day. Let's dive in. So I was a young fighter pilot and I was excited to be a fighter pilot. I flew for 6 years, and eventually an opportunity came up to get out and go fly for the airlines. So what I decided to do was, look at my time in the Air Force and say, hey man, this has been amazing. I've gotten to do some incredible stuff. I'm gonna go fly for the airlines now. So I decided to go fly for an airline. And I was doing most of my flying in the Florida area, a lot of Caribbean flying, when the airline I was flying for went bankrupt. Huge bummer. I mean, it can happen. People get furloughed because of things like that, and a lot of pilots lost their job, which was very unfortunate. And at that point, I was feeling pretty desperate because I had the ability to pay my rent one day, and then the next day I couldn't pay anything. So it's kind of this desperate situation. And as an aviator, I want to be in a cockpit. I want to fly. And so having that kind of ripped out from underneath you essentially overnight is just a hard pill to swallow. So you could say that, I was feeling relatively desperate to not have to go work in an office. I wanted my office to be 30,000 feet in the sky, and not having that opportunity is just a weird feeling as a pilot. One week I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to get a real job, I guess, until I can get some sort of an aviation gig. And I was going through my mail, and I got a kind of an interesting envelope that just didn't have a return address. I opened it up and it said, hey, if you're interested in a specialized aviation opportunity, show up at this restaurant at this time in Miami, Florida. So thinking that, hey, this could be my golden ticket to get back into aviation. Yeah, why wouldn't I go check it out? And I was thinking there would be like 4 or 5 pilots there, and it would be some new startup airline or some sort of cargo gig that I'd be doing, and I was like, hey, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go check it out. So I showed up to the restaurant, looking good, ready to just show my best self and get hired for this aviation gig. It was really interesting though, because I sat down and I couldn't really see anyone else in that restaurant that was kind of looked like they were in interview mode, or like they were there to try to get a gig flying jets. So I was just like, okay, whatever. Grabbed a table, sat down, and then a guy came across who was sitting at the bar and sat down at the table with me, and he said, hello, are you here to talk about aviation? And I was like, yeah, how'd you know? And he's like, oh, well, we're just, and he kind of avoided the question, he kind of dodged it. He's like, well, we're just seeking aviation professionals to join our company and help us launch. And if you do this, there's a really, really high chance that you'll never have to worry about money again because we've focused on making sure that you get paid really, really well. I was like, okay, awesome. Sounds great. And he said, so you haven't flown in a while, right? And I was like, how'd you know that? And he's like, well, that one airline went bankrupt, so I figured you were probably one of those pilots who got furloughed when that happened. And I was just like, oh, okay, all right. And then I asked, hey, can you tell me more about what this aviation gig would be? What would I be doing? And he said, well, let me ask you some questions first. He said, tell me about your time in the military. And again, in my mind, I'm like, how does this guy know I was in the military, But I was like, well, I flew fighter jets, did a lot of low-level flying, a ton of formation work. A lot of the flying I did was interdiction, which is essentially going really low level, like 100 feet sometimes, supersonic into enemy territory, and then, doing what you need to do, and then getting yourself out safely. And then you join up in formation a lot of times with a 4-ship or a 2-ship. And he was asking like, so how long did you stay in formation position with each other? And I was like, what? Like that's kind of an interesting thing to ask, right? Like no one really asks me that question. I mean, maybe when I was on the Thunderbirds, they would ask me that, but it was just kind of strange that he was like, tell me the exact amount of time that you would stay in formation position and what did that feel like? So, I was like, well, it's tiring, but sometimes I'd be in formation position for 20, 30 minutes, especially if you're in weather. All fighter pilots out there, especially if you're doing like a long flight, like let's say you're ferrying jets from one coast to the other, you're gonna get into clouds sometimes, and you're gonna have to be in formation position for 30 to 40 minutes, which is super uncomfortable. You can get back into radar trail, but sometimes you can't string your formation out that long just because of air traffic control and some of the things that they need as far as their requirements. So I was like in formation position a lot of times for 40 minutes in a row. That doesn't even count some of the Thunderbird stuff we did, like doing flyovers for the Super Bowl. And this guy was like, whoa, like, okay, you did a lot of formation work. That's great. Like, we're definitely looking for somebody, who has that amount of focus, and I'm like, okay, interesting. So I was kind of getting some strange vibes from the guy. And again, at the end of the interaction, he stood up, he slid money across the table to pay the bill for the drinks, and he said, Ryan, if you decide to come fly with us, you'll never have to worry about money again. So I hope to hear from you. If you're interested in the job, call this phone number. I was like, oh man. And so he paid the bill, walked away, and in my mind just started churning. I was like, what was that? What was that all about? And one side of my mind was like, well, this is an aviation opportunity. I don't, necessarily know what it's quite about, but this could bridge the gap, and it could keep me flying and keep me current until I can get hired by a major airline, which is what my goal was. So, part of my mind is like, well, I'll just do it for a little while. I could just do this for 6 months, make some side money, and then transition to the airlines when that time comes. And then the other half of my brain, like the angel, so that was the devil. Now the angel is like, don't know what you're getting yourself into, kind of like Barry Seal and American Made. You don't know what they're going to have you hauling in the back of that plane. And at the end of the day, people like this, and the vibe I was getting from them was at some point there could come a time where I couldn't say no. Especially if they're paying you, hundreds of thousands of dollars to carry whatever you're carrying, and then you say, no, I'm good, I'm not going to do it this month. They're going to be like, yeah, actually, you are going to do it this month. And then you'd be looking over your shoulder the entire time. So I had this devil and this angel on my shoulder, trying to convince me to go one way or the other. But then eventually, I decided that I didn't want to look over my shoulder, and I wanted to really get a commercial aviation job. So I decided ultimately, it was a little bit of a tough decision, but I decided ultimately not to call the phone number on the card. And then a few weeks later, I was talking with some other pilots who had gotten furloughed from that airline, and specifically some of them that were fighter pilots prior to that. And I was telling them about this experience, and they were like, really? Like you got contacted by that guy too? And I was like, yeah, okay, we need to do some digging into this. We need to see what's going on. We need to figure out, who that guy was. And so we joined forces, started doing a whole bunch of research, and we started talking to some folks in the area who are in local law enforcement. And it turns out that there were plots all around Miami and Florida at that time to get former fighter pilots to work essentially for cartels, drug runners, weapons runners, warlords. And what would happen is you would be sent to like Colombia, and you would get a Learjet, this like brand new Learjet packed full of nefarious things, drugs, money, guns, kind of like Barry Seal. and then you would take off from Colombia and join up with a 747 coming out of South America, fly underneath it all the way into US airspace. You'd be in formation position the entire time wearing night vision goggles. That was the scheme. And then once you got below the radar, you would dip off and go to a little teeny tiny airfield somewhere, in the south of America, unload your cargo, and then fly your Learjet back a couple days later and do it all again. These pilots were getting paid upwards of $100,000 each trip. I mean, so super sketchy, right? Super sketchy things going on. There's also rumor that it was, kind of like Barry Seal, it was the CIA that was having pilots do that to try to keep tabs on some of the narco traffickers. I don't know for sure who that guy was, whether, it was a 3-letter agency guy or, someone doing something illegal. All I know is, at the end of the day, it's always nice to not look over your shoulder, and man, what a crazy experience. So I hope you guys enjoyed that story. And if you have great aviation videos and things that I can break down on this channel and share, I would love to do that. So I'm gonna release the American-made reaction trailer as well. So check that out. But this was a little more in-depth in that story. But in that trailer, I'll also talk a little bit about this story as well. Really glad you guys are here. Please go ahead and dominate that like button for me. That would just help me out a ton, and maybe even subscribe. Hey, and you could also check out BJet Clean. It's a fighter pilot owned shave and shower grooming company. I started it with a Wizzo, a weapons systems operator. He was in my back seat. We flew a lot together, and we ended up starting this company together. And our whole goal is just to create excellent grooming products and to give back to veterans, and obviously to bring you great content. So thanks for being here on my channel, guys. This is Ryan signing off. We'll see you in the next video.